There's a very famous book of philosophy called the Kuzari. And the Kuzari, which was written by the great Spanish sage and poet Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, is a record of a conversation between a king, a non-Jewish king who wanted to convert, and who gathered to himself a priest, an imam, and a rabbi, and who asked many philosophical and religious questions. In fact, this is the story of the Khuzars, which was a certain type of tribe that converted en masse to Judaism. Now, Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was not there at the time, but he wrote his philosophical book around this. What would the king have asked this chacham, this wise person, about Judaism? And one of the questions that the king put to the sage was as follows. I see that you, the Jewish people, are quite a peace-loving people, and you're not a violent people. Is that something that is inherent in your nature? Or is it only because you are not in a situation to actually perpetrate violence? In other words, you, the Jewish people, have been in exile for many hundreds, if not thousands of years. And that's why you are powerless. But perhaps, if you were to have your own country, your own state, and your own army, you might be as violent as any other nation. And this was a question that the Chacham, the sage, was not really able to adequately answer, because he didn't know how would the Jewish people behave if they were given their own state. And of course, this was a question that remained just in the realm of theory for many hundreds of years, until, of course, the Jewish people established the State of Israel in 1948. And they had to establish the IDF, the Israel Defense Force. And now the question is, are they going to be different from other nations? Are they still going to be peace-loving? Or are they going to become a violent, aggressive nation? And this is something that is hinted to and discussed in our parasha. Yitzhak is very elderly. And he says to his older son, the older twin, Esav, please come in and I'm going to bless you before I pass away. Well, of course, Rivka, Yitzhak's wife, finds out about this, and she doesn't want Esav to receive this blessing. She is much closer to her son Yaakov, and she sees that Esav has certain problems with his personality. So she goes to Yaakov and says, Yaakov, you need to disguise yourself as your brother Esav, and you need to go into your father, at that time Yitzhak was blind, and convince him that you are in fact Esav, and receive the blessing that should be going to Esav. And this is exactly what Yaakov does. He disguises himself as his brother Esau. He puts on clothing that sort of resembles the hairiness of his brother. He comes in with wonderful treats that Rivka has prepared, and he says to his father, bless me, my father. Well, immediately Yitzhak is not so sure here. Is this really Esav? He's calling himself Esav, but it doesn't really sound as if he's Esav. And he calls Yaakov and he says, come here, my son. Let me kiss you. Let me feel you. Are you really my son Esau? And of course, Yaakov comes close, and he has this hair on his arms that he has attached, and he feels like Esav. His father kisses him, and he blesses him. But he says the famous words. He says, Hayadayim yadei Esav v'hakol kol Yaakov. The hands are the hands of Esau, but the voice is the voice of Jacob. Now, the simple meaning of that is that Yitzhak couldn't make sense of this, because physically it felt like Esau, but the voice was the voice of Jacob. And Rashi says what that really means on a deeper meaning is that Yaakov was a person who usually spoke with a great deal of gentleness and sensitivity, whereas Esav was a little bit gruff. So he got the feeling that this was Yaakov. But what our sages tell us is that this statement of Yitzhak summarizes the nature of two famous nations, the nation of Israel and the nation of Edom, the descendants of Esav, who eventually became the Roman people. And the difference was as follows. Hakol kol Yaakov. The voice is the voice of Jacob. What is the power of the Jewish people, of the Israelites? It's their voice. The voice of prayer, the voice of learning Torah, the voice of encouragement and good deeds. What is the power of Esau? The Hayadayim yadei Esav. Their power are their hands, physical power. Or as later Yitzhak blessed Esav, B'char b'chatiche, you shall live by the sword. Your power is in aggression. That is how you conquer the world. But that's not how the Jewish people conquer the world. They use their voice. And of course, the voice can be used in a very negative way to speak slander and to hurt people. But but we are meant to use our voice for much greater purposes. And I think this should always inform how the Jewish people behaves, how the state of Israel behaves, how the IDF behaves. Yes, we have to have an army. We have to protect ourselves. We can't sit back and do nothing. We have to make sure that we have the best possible army. But we have to realize that's not our core strength. Our core strength is our voice, our ability to speak out against injustices, our ability to cry out to Hashem. When the Jews were at the Red Sea and they saw the Mitzrim, the Egyptians behind them, what did they do? They were in a desperate situation. And the Torah says they called out to God. They used their power of the voice. And the sea split. We have to realize that this is our power. And especially at this time that the state of Israel is going through a great deal of difficulties. Yes, we have to take a defensive stance. And we have to make sure that we protect ourselves. But never forget that our power is in our voice. Hakol kol Yaakov. Let's call out to Hashem for salvation. I wish you a Shabbat Shalom.